Well, Toronto is a great jazz city, and I love jazz. I always have. And there's also a Ryerson connection for me and Toronto and jazz. Although I had heard some jazz when I lived on the prairies, I remember I went one time when I was living in Kindersley, Saskatchewan, to Regina, Saskatchewan, and there was a band called the Regina Hobby Band. It was a jazz band, and I remember they played in a basement, and where the band was slightly raked, and the guys at the back, you could hardly see their heads because the ceiling was low. And I thought, boy, this is great stuff. A band, a kind of a big band in a small space. When I came to, that was about my main introduction to jazz, except for some records I had of Fats Waller and so on. So when I came to Toronto in the very first year, the student council put on a jazz concert in Kerr Hall. That's the old building still on the Ryerson campus, and they put on Peter Appleyard, right? Peter Appleyard, the vibraphonist, and he's great. He's a great Canadian, and he had put out either before or since an album called Anything Goes, and it's that song Anything Goes is you probably know it. I've written down I shouldn't be reaching for stuff here, but I may break into song here. In olden days, a glimpse of stalking was looked on as something shocking, but now God knows, anything goes. Good authors too, who once knew better words, now only use four-letter words writing prose. Anything goes. If driving fast cars you like, or low bars you like, if old hymns you like, or bare limbs you like, if Mae West you like, or me undressed if you like, why, nobody will oppose when every night the sex that's smart is intruding in nudist parties in studios. Anything goes. And this was one of his main numbers that he played on the vibraphone. So I have these memories of jazz in Toronto. There's so many of them. One of them, for instance, was when I took my son, who was about 10, to Bourbon Street. That's on the second floor above Basin Street on Queen Street West. And it was the Rob McConnell Big Band. And so my son said, before we went, he said, Dad, I'm really not interested in hearing a bunch of horn players play in unison. Those were his very words. So anyway, we go up the stairs, we're a bit late. The place was packed. But what happened was that the staff brought a small round table right to the front. We were about 4 feet away from this line of saxophones, right? And there was one more customer came and sat at that little round table. It was Dave Broadfoot, the comedian. I don't know if people know Dave Broadfoot, but he had a classic line that he used on almost every one of his comic skits. And it was, when I regained consciousness. A lot of people will remember that. So anyway, there we were, and the Boss Brass was just playing, and it sold Grin on big bands ever since. And as a matter of fact, last Father's Day, I was over at his house. We were, celebrating Father's Day, and we stayed up until about 2 a.m. playing big band music. Wow. Including Ellington at Newport. That was 1956. And that was the famous recording. A lot of people know it. It's a classic, where the saxophonist Paul Gonsalves played 27 straight choruses. And Duke Ellington, because the police came and said there's going to be a riot, and Duke Ellington had to repeatedly give these heavy chords to get Gonsalves to stop playing. It was a classic.
Wow.
And my daughter too, when I told her today that we're going to talk about jazz, she says, Dad, what I remember is being at the Forum in Ontario Place and hearing Ella Fitzgerald live. We're all sitting on the grass, So another one was, you could hear Oscar Peterson at the Town Tavern or the Colonial. And I remember one night I was in there to hear Oscar Peterson, and there were very few people there at that time. We're going way, way back, to the late 50s. And so a guy that had far too many cups, he stood up and he started to mumble, you know, to Oscar while Oscar was playing. Oscar could not stand people making any noise or anything when he was playing. And here's this guy standing up and trying to tell Oscar, "You're great," or something. And Oscar rose from the piano and he looked at the guy and said, "Would you like to come up and play the piano?" Well, two big guys came, lifted this guy up, carried him out, and we understand they threw him onto the sidewalk. That was the days when that kind of stuff could happen. But anyway, it's not only the great jazz we've heard, but it's the stories that go. And there actually is one other story. I wrote this. I've got this in my journal. And this is what I wrote in my journal. It's right in one of these journals. Okay, but I typed it out. It was Sunday, January the 21st, 1968. My wife Jeannie and I went to a jazz concert at the Town Tavern, with the admission proceeds going to Archie Elaine. That was the drummer, and he'd just a short time before been in a terrible car accident, so it was to raise money for him. We showed up early, we got good seats, the place was packed, many were turned away. So who was on set? Now this is why I couldn't just remember this without referring to my notes. Get this. The Brian Brown Trio by Rothanist Haygood Hardy, Rob McConnell's Big Brass Band, Jim McHard and the Metro Stompers, Ron Collier, Joe Williams, Freddie Stone, Lonnie Johnson, Don Franks. It was incredible. Any one of those artists would have been a beautiful night of entertainment. And so when I was writing out these notes today, it brought to mind a joke that I heard one time that involved Joe Williams, and it goes something like this. A woman is in a bar, and she sees this black guy, and he looks kind of familiar to her. And so they start a conversation. And she said to him, "You know, you look remarkably like Joe Williams." And she said, "If you were Joe Williams, I would accept an invitation to dinner with you, candlelight and wine." To which the man's response was, "Well, every day I got the blues." Anyway, I can't reproduce his voice, but I thought it was kind of a, and by the way, in 1 week from today, I'm leaving for Portugal on a jazz safari. Oh, wow. And Diana Krall is going to be singing, and Tom Jones, and others. And again, there's a Ryerson connection because it's sponsored by 91.1, which used to be the radio station CJRT of Ryerson that I mentioned earlier, and it's now 91.1. And and I'm making a donation. Part of the cost of going to Portugal is a donation for the station. And so that Ryerson connection and the jazz connection live on.
What would you say are your top 3 jazz spots in the city?
Oh gosh, the top 3 jazz spots. Well, I can more recall former ones, because the Town Tavern is gone, the Colonial is gone, Steele's Tavern is gone, the First Floor Club is gone. It was on Asquith, and when I worked at the Globe and Mail, that's where the Toronto Public Reference Library is these days. When I worked at the Globe and Mail, because it was a morning paper, we worked late shifts, and the last edition went to bed at 1 a.m., and so some of us, 3 or 4 of us who were jazz aficionados, we would then at 1 o'clock head off for the First Floor Club, and they had top jazz people there. But most of the places I'm remembering are gone now, and I would hesitate. There's the Chicken Deli. There's still Basin Street is there, I believe. I don't get out to the clubs so much anymore. You know, when you have Amazon and everything, and no wife to take, then you stop going to the clubs as much. And So I'm sorry. It's probably just as well I can't answer that because I might be misleading people if they think I really know my jazz and mislead them into going someplace that perhaps is second rate.
Mm.